My father secretly gave my college fund to my brother. I found out at the financial aid office. You know that moment when your entire world shatters in the most unexpected place? Mine happened in a cramped financial aid office on what was supposed to be the best day of my life. I had just gotten accepted to my dream university, clutching my acceptance letter like it was made of gold, ready to finally access the college fund my parents had been contributing to since I was born. But what the financial aid officer told me next would expose a family secret so devastating that it would tear us apart forever. Stick around because the revenge I got on my father and brother is something you won't believe. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand just how deep this betrayal cut. My name is Sarah, and I grew up in what seemed like a perfect middle-class family in suburban Ohio. My parents always told me they were saving for my education, that they'd been putting money away since the day I was born. Every birthday, every Christmas, relatives would slip me checks and say this is going straight to your college fund. I worked my tail off through high school, maintaining a perfect GPA, joining every club, volunteering at the local hospital, all because I knew my parents were supporting my dreams. My older brother Jake was a different story altogether, the kind of guy who coasted through life expecting everything to be handed to him. He barely graduated high school with a 2.5 GPA and had no interest in college whatsoever. Instead, he moved back home after graduation, working part-time at a local gym while spending most of his time gaming and partying with his friends. My parents constantly made excuses for him, saying he was finding himself and that not everyone is college material. I tried not to judge, but honestly, it frustrated me how much slack they cut him while I was busting my butt every single day. Fast forward to spring of my senior year when that thick envelope arrived from Northwestern University. I screamed so loud the neighbors probably thought someone was being murdered, running through the house waving that acceptance letter like a victory flag. My mom hugged me tight with tears in her eyes, telling me how proud she was, how all my hard work had paid off. My dad gave me an awkward side hug and mumbled something about being happy for me, but there was something weird in his eyes that I couldn't quite read. Looking back now, I realize it was guilt, pure, suffocating guilt eating him alive from the inside. The financial aid appointment was scheduled for 2 weeks later, a routine meeting to discuss my package and access my college fund. I dressed up nice, feeling so adult and accomplished, ready to officially step into my future. My mom was supposed to come with me, but called that morning saying she had a migraine and couldn't make it. She insisted I could handle it alone, since it was just paperwork, and that Dad would be there to support me. That should have been my first red flag, the way she suddenly couldn't look me in the eye that whole week. I sat across from Mrs. Patterson, the financial aid counselor, a kind woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose. She pulled up my file on her computer and started clicking through screens, her expression growing more confused with each passing second. "Sarah, I'm looking at your family's financial information and I'm not seeing any college fund registered under your name," she said carefully. My stomach dropped like I'd just crested the peak of a roller coaster. I laughed nervously and explained that my parents had been saving for 18 years, that there had to be some mistake in the system. Mrs. Patterson clicked around some more, pulled up different screens, made a few phone calls, and each minute felt like an eternity. Finally, she turned back to me with the most pitying expression I'd ever seen on another human being's face. "Sarah, there is a college fund associated with your family's social security numbers, but it's registered entirely under your brother Jacob's name," she said slowly. The room started spinning, and I genuinely thought I might throw up right there on her desk. "That's impossible," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Jake isn't even going to college." The details came out in fragments that made me feel like I was living in some twisted nightmare. The fund existed, had over $80,000 in it, money my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and family friends had contributed over nearly 2 decades. Every check I'd watched my parents deposit for my education had apparently been redirected to an account in Jake's name. Mrs. Patterson showed me the documentation with her screen turned toward me, and there it was in black and white. My father was listed as the account manager, with Jake as the sole beneficiary, changed approximately 4 years ago when I was just 14. I somehow made it to my car before completely breaking down, ugly crying so hard I could barely breathe. My hands shook as I tried to call my mom, but she didn't answer, and suddenly her convenient migraine made perfect sense. I called 6 more times before finally driving home in a daze, running 2 red lights because I couldn't focus on anything except the betrayal churning in my gut. When I burst through the front door, my mom was in the kitchen pretending to make dinner, and the guilty look on her face told me everything I needed to know. "You knew," I said, my voice deadly calm. "You knew the whole time." What followed was the ugliest family confrontation I'd ever experienced, with my mom crying and making excuses while refusing to meet my eyes. She admitted that 4 years ago, Jake had gotten involved with some bad people and racked up a massive debt from gambling. My father had panicked, convinced that Jake would get hurt or worse, and made the decision to transfer my college fund into Jake's name. They'd paid off his debts, but instead of transferring the money back, they'd left it in Jake's account just in case he ever decided to pursue education or needed help getting started in life. My mom kept saying they'd planned to take out loans for me, that they'd figure something out, as if that made the betrayal any less devastating. The part that destroyed me most was that they'd kept lying to my face for 4 years, letting me believe my future was secure while they'd given it away to my irresponsible brother. Every time a relative sent money for my college fund, every birthday and graduation check, it had all been a performance. My parents had looked me in the eye countless times and reassured me about my college fund while knowing they'd given it to Jake. They'd watched me work myself to exhaustion, sacrifice my social life, and stress about college applications while sitting on this massive secret. The level of deception was so profound I felt like I didn't even know who these people were anymore. My father finally came home around 8 that evening, and I was waiting for him with printouts from the financial aid office. He actually had the audacity to act confused at first, asking what was wrong, playing dumb like he didn't already know. When I slammed the papers on the table in front of him, his face went pale and he sank into a chair. Jake needed it more, was literally the first thing out of his mouth. Not an apology, not an explanation, just that my brother's gambling debts were more important than my entire future. I asked him how long he'd been planning to keep lying to me, and he couldn't even answer. The argument that followed was nuclear, with me screaming about betrayal and theft while my dad tried to justify protecting Jake. He actually said that I was smart enough to get scholarships and that Jake needed more help in life because he wasn't academically gifted. The implication was crystal clear. My achievements meant I deserved less support because I'd succeeded despite the odds. My mom stood there crying uselessly, wringing her hands, but not actually defending me or taking my side. When I demanded they transfer the money back, my father dropped the final bomb. They couldn't, because Jake had already spent $20,000 of it on a new truck and starting a business that had immediately failed. I moved out that night, packing everything I could fit in my car and driving to my best friend Emma's house. Her parents had known me since elementary school and immediately took me in when I showed up sobbing with garbage bags full of clothes. I didn't speak to my parents or Jake for 3 months after that night, ignoring their calls and messages. My mom tried to blame everything on my dad, claiming she'd opposed the decision but had been overruled as if she were some helpless victim. Jake sent exactly one text message that said, "Sorry, sis," with a shrugging emoji, which somehow made everything worse because it showed how little he cared about destroying my future. The reality of my situation set in hard over the following weeks as I scrambled to figure out how to afford Northwestern. I applied for every scholarship I could find, took out maximum student loans, and picked up 2 part-time jobs. Emma's parents even offered to co-sign additional private loans because my parents refused to help with anything financial. I had to defer my enrollment by a semester to save up enough for housing deposits and books. Every single day was a struggle, watching my dreams slip further away because of my family's betrayal, and the rage inside me grew hotter and hotter with each passing week. But here's where the story takes a turn, because I wasn't about to let them destroy my life without consequences. I started doing some digging into my family's finances, requesting documents I was legally entitled to as someone who'd been listed on those accounts until age 14. What I discovered was that my father had actually committed several types of financial fraud in the process of transferring my funds. Money that relatives had explicitly designated for my education had been redirected without their knowledge or consent. My grandmother alone had contributed $15,000 specifically earmarked for my college expenses, documented in her own handwriting on deposit slips I found in old family files. I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in family financial disputes, using money I'd scraped together from my part-time jobs. She was fascinated by my case and agreed to take it on for a reduced fee because the fraud was so blatant. Together, we built a case showing that my father had essentially stolen funds that were designated gifts to me, not contributions to a general family fund. We sent formal demand letters to my parents, giving them 30 days to return the remaining $60,000 plus the $20,000 Jake had spent. The letter outlined potential criminal charges for fraud and theft, and you should have seen how fast my father's attitude changed when legal consequences entered the picture. My parents completely panicked, with my dad calling me crying for the first time in my entire life. He begged me not to pursue legal action, promising they'd pay everything back, claiming I was destroying the family over money. I told him he'd destroyed the family when he chose to value Jake's irresponsibility over my future, and that I wasn't backing down. My mom tried emotional manipulation, saying I was being cruel and vindictive, that families should forgive each other. I pointed out that they'd had 4 years to come clean and hadn't, that they'd only cared when facing actual consequences, and that forgiveness was something they'd have to earn over years, not days. The legal pressure worked better than I ever imagined because my father's company had strict ethics policies about employees being involved in fraud cases. His job at a major financial firm required a clean record, and suddenly he was looking at potential termination if charges were filed. Within 2 weeks, my parents had liquidated investments and taken out a home equity loan to get together $75,000. They transferred it into a new account in my name only, with legal documentation ensuring they had zero access or control. The extra $15,000 was their payment for the emotional damages, the years of lies, and my legal fees, all outlined in a settlement agreement we both signed. Jake was furious when he found out, showing up at Emma's house to confront me about screwing over the family. He actually had the nerve to say I was being selfish, that he'd needed that money to get his life together, completely ignoring that it was never his to begin with. I told him he'd had $20,000 of my money and had blown it on a truck and a failed business, and that maybe if he'd made better choices, none of this would have happened. He called me a vindictive witch and said I'd ruined his relationship with our parents by forcing them into debt, as if he bore zero responsibility for any of this disaster. The beautiful irony is that my parents now have to repay that home equity loan, meaning they're essentially paying for my college education like they'd promised all along, just under very different circumstances. My father's relationship with Jake has become strained because Dad blames him for the whole situation, conveniently forgetting his own role in the betrayal. Jake had to sell his fancy truck to help contribute to the repayment, which gave me more satisfaction than it probably should have. He's back to living at home in his childhood bedroom, working 2 jobs to pay my parents back, living the struggle he'd tried to avoid by stealing my future. I started at Northwestern that winter semester with my finances secured, my tuition paid, and absolutely zero help or involvement from my family. The freedom of cutting them off was incredible, like removing a massive weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I made new friends who came from functional families, and being around them showed me just how dysfunctional and toxic my own family dynamics had been. My parents had always played favorites with Jake, making excuses for his failures while holding me to impossible standards, and I'd normalized it because I didn't know any different. My grandmother found out what happened about 6 months later when my aunt finally told her the truth, and she was absolutely livid. She called my father and tore into him for over an hour, threatening to cut him out of her will entirely for what he'd done to me. She'd been contributing to my college funds specifically because my grandfather had always valued education and would have wanted me to succeed. Learning that her money had gone to pay off Jake's gambling debts, then been spent on a truck, nearly gave her a heart attack from sheer rage. She immediately wrote me a check for $10,000 as an apology for not knowing sooner, and our relationship actually grew closer through the whole ordeal. Other family members started reaching out once the truth spread through our extended family network, and the court of public opinion was decisively on my side. My father's siblings called him out for his favoritism and betrayal, with my uncle straight up telling him he'd failed as a parent. Holidays became awkward because half the family refused to attend if my parents were there, splitting gatherings into separate events. My father's reputation in the family was completely destroyed, and he became that cautionary tale people whispered about at reunions, the dad who stole from his own daughter to bail out his golden child's son. The revenge I got wasn't just financial, it was watching my father face consequences for the first time in his life for his terrible choices. He'd always been the type to sweep problems under the rug, to take the easy way out, to prioritize short-term peace over long-term integrity. Now he was stuck in a situation entirely of his own making, paying back a loan for money he'd stolen, estranged from half his family, and watching his favorite son fail repeatedly. Every payment he made on that home equity loan was a reminder that actions have consequences and that betraying your children comes at a cost. My academic performance actually improved once I was away from the toxic environment of my family home, free from the favoritism and gaslighting. I made Bean's List my first full semester and got involved in research opportunities that were setting me up for an incredible career. Professors noticed my work ethic and dedication, writing recommendation letters that helped me secure prestigious internships. Everything my parents said I'd achieve through scholarships and loans, I was achieving, but through my own determination and despite their sabotage, not because of any support from them. The most satisfying moment came during my sophomore year when Jake texted me asking for money because he was struggling financially. The absolute audacity of this guy, who'd benefited from $80,000 of my money, now asking me for a loan, was almost comical. I screenshotted the message and sent it to my entire family group chat with the caption, "You cannot make this stuff up," before blocking his number permanently. My cousins absolutely roasted him in the chat, and apparently he didn't speak to anyone for weeks out of pure embarrassment. My relationship with my parents remains cordial but distant. Surface-level conversations during major holidays and nothing more. My mother occasionally tries to guilt me into forgiving and moving forward, but she doesn't seem to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or restoring trust. They broke something fundamental when they chose to lie to me for 4 years and prioritize Jake's poor choices over my earned success. I've made peace with having a family that exists only in biological terms, while building my own chosen family from friends and mentors who actually value me. The final twist in this saga came last year when Jake got arrested for fraud in his own business dealings, apparently not learning anything from our father's mistakes. He'd been running a social media marketing scam, taking people's money for services he never delivered, and someone finally reported him to the authorities. My father had to hire a criminal defense lawyer, draining even more money from their savings, all to defend the son he'd already sacrificed so much for. I felt a dark sense of vindication, knowing that every choice they'd made to protect Jake had only enabled him to become a worse person. Some people think my revenge was too harsh, that families should forgive each other and that I should have just accepted their apology and moved on. But those people don't understand what it feels like to have your entire future stolen by the people who were supposed to protect it. They don't know what it's like to work yourself to exhaustion while your parents smile and lie directly to your face. They haven't experienced the betrayal of learning your siblings' gambling debts were more important than your college education. So yeah, I made them pay back every cent, and I'd do it again without hesitation. My story isn't about money ultimately. It's about respect, integrity, and standing up for yourself when the people who should protect you decide to betray you instead. It's about refusing to be the family member who just accepts abuse and dysfunction because that's what family does.
It's about recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from toxic people, even when they're related to you by blood. The college fund was just money, but what they stole was my trust, my sense of security, and my belief that my parents actually valued me as much as my brother. I'm graduating next year with a degree in finance, which is ironic considering how this all started, and I've already got job offers from major firms. I built the future my parents tried to steal from me, and I did it entirely on my own terms, without their help or involvement. The young woman who walked into that financial aid office 4 years ago was devastated and lost, but the woman I am now is stronger, more independent, and completely unshakable. My father's betrayal taught me that you can't rely on anyone else to secure your future, that you have to fight for yourself, even when it's painful and difficult.
To everyone watching this who's dealing with family betrayal or favoritism, know that you're not crazy for being hurt, and you're not wrong for demanding accountability. Family doesn't get a free pass to destroy your life just because you share DNA, and sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is enforce boundaries and consequences. My revenge wasn't about being cruel. It was about refusing to be a victim and taking back what was rightfully mine. If my story teaches anything, it's that you should never set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, even if that someone is your own parent or sibling. Looking back, that day in the financial aid office was both the worst and best thing that ever happened to me because it ripped away the illusion of my perfect family. It hurt like hell, but it also freed me to become someone who doesn't accept mistreatment or make excuses for people who don't deserve them. I learned that sometimes revenge isn't about destruction, it's about restoration, taking back what was stolen and rebuilding yourself into someone even stronger than before. And honestly, watching my father struggle with the consequences of his own choices while I thrive despite his sabotage is better than any other revenge I could have imagined. So yeah, my father secretly gave my college fund to my brother. I found out in the worst possible way, and I made absolutely sure they paid for it in every sense of the word. Some might call it revenge, others might call it justice, but I just call it refusing to be a victim of someone else's terrible decisions. If you made it to the end of this story, drop a comment about whether you think I went too far or if my family got exactly what they deserved. Thanks for listening to the wildest betrayal of my life. And remember, never let anyone steal your future, not even family.